This book is called The Smartest Giant in Town by Julia Donaldson. George was a giant, the scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown sandals and the same old patched up gown. "I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town," he said sadly. But one day, George noticed a new shop. It was full of smart clothes, so he bought a smart shirt, a smart pair of trousers, a smart belt, a smart stripy tie, some smart socks with diamonds up the side, and a pair of smart shiny shoes. "Now I'm the smartest giant in town," he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind in the shop. He was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the pavement stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so very long and very cold. I wish I had a long warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new stripy tie. "It didn't match my socks anyway," he said, and as he wound it round and round the giraffe's neck, it made a wonderful scarf. "Thank you," said the giraffe. As George strode towards home, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and look me down, I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said, as he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat. It made a magnificent sail. "Thank you," said the goat. George strode on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat, but look me up and look me down, I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a tiny ruined house. Behind the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down, and now we've nowhere to live. I wish we had a new nice house." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. "It was giving me blisters anyway," he said, as the mouse and her babies scrambled inside. The shoe made a perfect home for them. "Thank you," they squeaked. George had to hop along the road now, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat, my shoe is a house for a little white mouse, but look me up and look me down, I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a campsite. Beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sleeping bag," said the fox. "I dropped it in a puddle. I wish I had a warm, dry sleeping bag." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his socks with diamonds up the sides. "It was tickling my toes anyway," he said, as the fox snuggled into it. It made a very fine sleeping bag. "Thank you," said the fox. George hopped on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat, my shoe is a house for a little white mouse, one of my socks is a bed for a fox, but look me up and look me down, I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a big squelchy bog. Beside the bog stood a dog who was howling. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's this bog," said the dog. "I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a dry, safe path." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his smart new belt. "It was squashing my tummy anyway," he said, as he laid it down over the bog. It made an excellent path. "Thank you," said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat, My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. My belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. But my trousers are falling down. I'm the coldest giant in town. Suddenly George felt sad and shivery and not at all smart. He stood on one foot and thought, I'll have to go back to the shop and buy some more clothes, he decided. He turned round and hopped all the way back to the shop. But when he got there, it was closed. Oh no, cried George. He sank onto the doorstep and a tear ran down his long nose. He felt as sad as all the animals he had met on his way home. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bag with something familiar poking out the top. George took a closer look. My gown, he yelled, my dear old gown and sandals. George put them on. He felt wonderfully comfortable. I'm the cosiest giant in town. He cried and he danced back home along the road. Outside his front door stood all the animals that he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. Come on, George, they said, open it. George untied the ribbon. Inside was a beautiful gold paper, a crown and a card. Look inside the card, George, said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. Inside it said, your tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. Your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with the sandals and gown of the kindest giant in town. Okay, this book is called Small Knight and George by Rhonda Armitage. Small Knight lived in a cold, old castle on a spiky hill. He didn't mind that it was cold or old. He loved the castle so much that he never wanted to go anywhere else. One morning, Dad Knight announced that it was time for Small Knight to have his first suit of armour, and his first horse, and his first shield, and his first sword, to go out to fight his first fierce dragon. Small Knight didn't want to fight a dragon. He wanted to play kick-a-ball with his friends. He didn't even know what a dragon looked like. Dragons live in caves. They breathe fire, and they're very fierce, explained Dad Knight. You'll know when you see one. Knights have to be big and brave and fight them. That's what knights do. Small Knight didn't feel big and brave. He felt little and frightened. He clunked in his armour and shivered in his boots, and made up a song as he rode along. This is a tale of a big brave knight who one fine day went out to fight a very fierce dragon who lived in a cave. Soon Small Knight came to a hovel. He tapped on the door. I'm looking for a very fierce dragon, he said politely. Have you seen one about? Don't talk to me about dragons, said Mr. Peasant. One knocked the roof off my hovel with a swipe of his scaly tail. Are you sure you want to fight a very fierce dragon? It's what brave knights do, explained Small Knight, but he looked at the hovel and he didn't feel brave. Small Knight came to a village. 6 damsels were brushing their golden hair. Excuse me, called Small Knight. I'm looking for a very fierce dragon. Have you seen one about? Don't talk to us about fierce dragons, cried the damsels. One roared down the street this morning. He gave us such a fright that he made our hair stand on end. Are you sure you want to fight a very fierce dragon? It's what small knights do, explained Small Knight. But he gazed at their hair and didn't feel brave. Small Knight came to a forest. A woodcutter was sitting on a tree stump. Good afternoon, said Small Knight. I'm looking for a very fierce dragon. Have you seen one around? Don't talk to me about fierce dragons, groaned the woodcutter. One breathed fire and burnt the forest down. Are you sure you want to fight a very fierce dragon? It's what brave knights do, explained Small Knight, but he looked at the trees and didn't feel brave. Small Knight clunked in his armour and shivered in his boots. He sang a different song as he rode along. This is a song about a not-so-brave knight who decided one day he didn't want to fight a very fierce dragon who lived in a cave. On the way home, he found a little creature. "Good evening," said Small Knight. "I'm Small Knight, and I'm supposed to be looking for a very fierce dragon. Have you seen one about?" "Don't talk to me about fierce dragons," cried the little creature. "I used to have a lovely dark home in a hill, and some very fierce dragon moved in, and now I've no home. Are you sure you want to fight a very fierce dragon?" "Not now," said Small Knight. "It's getting dark. I'll look for a very fierce dragon tomorrow. Please don't cry. You can stay at home tonight." "Thank you, Small Knight," sniffed the little creature. "Please, call me George." So, Small Knight and George hurried home. Mum and Dad Knight were waiting on the drawbridge. "Hello, Mum," called Small Knight. "I've brought my new friend home to stay." Mum Knight and the ladies in waiting all screamed. Everybody scrambled up into the gallery. "Mum, Dad," cried Small Knight, "I've been looking for dragons to fight all day, and now it's time for tea." "You only had to fight a very fierce dragon," called Mum Knight. "You didn't have to bring one home." "A dragon? Where?" said Small Knight. "There!" cried everybody. "Get behind me, George," shouted Small Knight. "There's a very fierce dragon about. I'm a big, brave knight. I'll look after you." "Excuse me, Small Knight," said George. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm the dragon, but dragons are big and fierce and breathe fire," said Small Knight. "I'm a small, friendly sort of dragon," smiled George. "I'm frightened of fierce dragons too." "A dragon?" cheered Small Knight. "A real dragon? Could you pretend to be really fierce so I can fight you?" Next morning, they had a wonderful fight, when no one won at all, and they played kickball for the rest of the day. Everybody loved George. He showed all the knights the best way to fight very fierce dragons, and he learned to breathe fire to keep that old, old castle warm. And as for Small Knight and George, well, they were the very best of friends, and Small Knight never had to fight a very fierce dragon ever again.